I used to believe that my life was an unassailable fortress built on discipline, hard work, and a carefully constructed stability that left little room for surprises. I prided myself on having it all: a lucrative six-figure career that I had fought hard to sustain, a luxury home in Santa Monica that stood as a testament to my relentless drive, and a family that, on the surface, seemed to be the very definition of perfection. My wife, Vanessa, was charming and elegant, the kind of woman who carried herself with an air of confidence and grace, and our two beautiful daughters, Sophie and Claire, twins of 5 years who filled my days with joy and whose laughter was the soundtrack of my life, were my entire world. Every day had followed a predictable rhythm. Every Sunday morning was a meticulously choreographed ritual designed to set the tone for the week ahead. But that Sunday, as I stepped into the bustling terminal of LAX, I felt an inexplicable shift in the air, a subtle disturbance that undermined the illusion of control I had always clung to so desperately. The airport, usually a place of transient routine and predictable logistics, suddenly seemed charged with tension and uncertainty. Vanessa, who was always measured and calm, appeared uncharacteristically effervescent and overly eager, her voice light and almost too bright as she chattered about our family vacation to Hawaii. Instead of speaking with the gentle excitement of a loving mother anticipating a long-awaited break, she talked about the trip as if it were a meticulously planned influencer shoot, a series of hashtags and perfectly staged moments rather than a genuine opportunity for family bonding. I tried to dismiss these observations as mere quirks of her personality, reminding myself that sometimes silence was the easier path and that asking too many questions might disturb a carefully maintained equilibrium. But even as I attempted to convince myself that nothing was amiss, my eyes could not help but linger on the small details that betrayed her unusual behavior. The way she checked her phone every few seconds, the almost imperceptible smirk that crossed her lips when I mentioned that I would be driving separately to pick up an item from the office before our departure, as though she were silently acknowledging a secret I was not privy to. I had always believed that our plans were shared and that we were leaving together, that the itinerary we had agreed upon was a mutual creation. Yet, an unsettling feeling grew within me, a quiet, insistent warning that the very foundation of our perfect life was built on an illusion. I remember standing in that terminal with a mind full of half-formed suspicions and a heart slowly beginning to question everything I had taken for granted. In the back of my mind, I wondered if perhaps there were conversations I had missed, if Vanessa had been planning something behind my back, something that would shatter the carefully constructed narrative of our family's unity. The structured routine I had so relied on began to crumble as I watched her interact with strangers and glance furtively at her phone, her smile lacking the genuine warmth I had come to associate with her. That smile, at once radiant and strangely detached, hinted at a secret that was not meant for my ears. I clung to the notion that maybe it was just an off day, a fleeting moment of uncharacteristic behavior that would soon pass, but deep down I sensed that nothing would ever be the same. Every instinct screamed that control was merely an illusion, that life's most cherished certainties could be swept away in an instant, leaving nothing but uncertainty and betrayal in their wake. I stepped into the terminal with my thoughts swirling, trying to hold on to the familiar routines that had defined my world, unaware that the carefully ordered life I had built was on the brink of disintegration. The hum of conversations, the clatter of rolling suitcases, and the indifferent buzz of overhead announcements all faded into a background noise as my mind fixated on the subtle cues I could no longer ignore. I recalled Vanessa's unusually bright tone, the way she casually dismissed my mention of a shared departure plan, and the furtive glances that now appeared laden with meaning. Even as I attempted to rationalize these small anomalies, a creeping certainty took hold. By the time I would eventually arrive at the gate, the fate of our family vacation, and indeed of my entire life, would have been irrevocably altered by decisions made without my knowledge. I left my previous certainty behind in that crowded terminal, replaced by an ominous understanding that control was nothing more than a fleeting illusion, a fragile construct that could shatter in the blink of an eye. The routine of my life, once a source of comfort and pride, now felt like a poorly constructed facade waiting to be dismantled. And so, with a heavy heart and an anxious mind, I braced myself for what was to come, unaware that the world I knew was about to be completely upended by a betrayal that would redefine everything I held dear. The moment I stepped into LAX, an inexplicable heaviness settled upon me. An emotion that was not the familiar stress of travel but something far deeper, more personal, and profoundly unsettling. I approached the check-in counter with the precision of someone who had done this 1,000 times before, my hand steady as I presented my passport and reservation details. Yet as the airline employee keyed in my information, I noticed her fingers hesitate, her eyes flickering with a brief uncertainty before returning to her work. There was a moment, just an instant, when her expression changed, the routine smile replaced by a frown that sent a chill down my spine. I heard her say, almost mechanically, "Sir, your reservation isn't in the system." At first, I laughed softly, assuming it was a clerical error or a minor technical glitch. I reminded her that Vanessa had booked our family vacation to Hawaii and that we were scheduled to fly out that very day. But as she typed further and her brow furrowed deeper, a sinking feeling took root. "Your reservation was canceled," she finally said, her voice devoid of the reassurance I desperately needed. My mind began to spin wildly, trying to reconcile this anomaly with the plans Vanessa and I had so painstakingly laid out. I fumbled for my phone with trembling fingers, and when I opened my messages, there it was, a single, chilling text from Vanessa that read, "You should be taking care of the kids." Attached to that terse message was a photograph that struck me like a physical blow. Sophie and Claire, our precious little girls, sitting alone on a cold metal bench near the Starbucks in the terminal, their small legs dangling, their eyes wide with a mixture of confusion and quiet despair. I felt as though the floor had been ripped from beneath me, leaving me suspended in a nightmare from which there was no awakening. The cacophony of the terminal faded into a background hum as my world narrowed to that single, damning image. I could see the tear-streaked face of Claire, her cheeks stained with the remnants of sobs, and Sophie clutching her cherished pink teddy bear. The same bear that had comforted her through countless nights. I was frozen, unable to respond even as the airline employee repeated, almost timidly, "Sir?" I tried to speak, but my voice was lost in the overwhelming tide of betrayal and sorrow. In that suspended moment, I realized with crushing clarity that Vanessa had not merely canceled a reservation. She had orchestrated a calculated abandonment. My mind raced as the realization set in that my entire family, the life I had so carefully built, was being dismantled without my consent, without my knowledge. I felt a storm of emotions surging inside me, anger, disbelief, and a profound sense of loss that made it difficult to even breathe. The friendly banter of fellow travelers, the routine announcements overhead, and the clatter of suitcases all seemed irrelevant, as if the universe had narrowed its focus solely on the betrayal I was enduring. I stood there, paralyzed by the gravity of the situation, my heart pounding so forcefully that I feared it might shatter. Every instinct in me screamed that Vanessa had set this in motion long before I had even arrived at the terminal, that the carefully orchestrated plans for our family vacation were nothing more than a ruse designed to leave me powerless. In that moment of betrayal, I felt as if the foundation of everything I held dear, my work, my home, my identity as a husband and father, was crumbling beneath me, replaced by an overwhelming void of uncertainty and despair. I could no longer trust the routine, the small signals of everyday life that I had once taken for granted, for they now seemed to conceal secrets and lies. As I stood before the counter, the realization that I had been left behind, that the woman I loved had abandoned not only me but also our daughters, washed over me in a tidal wave of hopelessness. I tried to steady my breathing, but each inhale brought with it a deeper sense of betrayal, a burning question that demanded an answer. Why? In that vast, indifferent terminal, surrounded by strangers oblivious to the personal catastrophe unfolding before me, I was forced to confront the harsh truth that my life had been irrevocably altered by Vanessa's actions. The reality was clear and devastating. I was alone, abandoned by the very person I had trusted with my heart, and my daughters were left in a cold, uncaring limbo. The routine of travel, the familiar process of check-in and boarding, had become a macabre backdrop for the unraveling of everything I had built, leaving me to grapple with the shattering realization that control was nothing more than an illusion, easily destroyed by a single, calculated act of betrayal. I ran through the sprawling concourse of the airport like a man possessed, propelled by a desperate need to reach the source of my anguish. Every step I took echoed with the frantic pounding of my heart as I navigated through clusters of bewildered travelers and indifferent security personnel. The world around me blurred into a chaotic mix of moving bodies and distant voices until, through the clamor, I heard it, a small, tentative cry that pierced the overwhelming noise. "Daddy?" The sound, fragile and quivering, seemed to hang in the air like a plea for rescue. I whipped around, my eyes scanning the crowd with frantic intensity, and there they were, Sophie and Claire, huddled together on a cold, unforgiving bench near a quiet corner of the terminal. The sight of my daughters, so small and vulnerable, sent a fresh surge of panic and overwhelming grief coursing through my veins. In that heart-stopping moment, time itself seemed to slow, each second stretching into an eternity as the full weight of my betrayal crashed down upon me. Sophie, her eyes wide with both terror and relief, threw herself into my arms without hesitation, while little Claire, her face etched with the silent residue of too many tears, clung tightly to me as though my embrace could erase the horrors of the past few minutes. I sank to my knees on that cold bench, enveloping them in a desperate, protective embrace that conveyed every unspoken promise of love and security, a promise I had always believed was unbreakable. The air was filled with the mingled sense of anxiety and the sterile aroma of an airport, yet all I could focus on was the soft, irregular beat of my heart and the quiet, broken whispers of my daughters. I longed to speak, to tell them that everything would be all right, that their mother would come back, and that the world would somehow be made right again. But my throat was constricted by the overwhelming sorrow and the unbearable knowledge that their reality had changed forever. In that moment, as I held them close, I knew with an unshakable clarity that nothing in our lives would ever be the same. Vanessa, the woman I had trusted implicitly, had not only abandoned me but had callously abandoned the very children who depended on me for every ounce of love and security in the world. I could almost hear the echoes of her laughter from moments before, the unsettling sound that now haunted every fiber of my being, reminding me of the cruel facade that had hidden the truth for so long. The raw pain and betrayal surged through me, intermingling with a fierce, protective love that burned brighter than any despair. I vowed silently, with every fiber of my shattered being, that I would never allow the cruelty of this moment to define my daughters' lives. I promised that I would be their rock, their unwavering sanctuary against the storm of deceit and abandonment that had been unleashed by Vanessa's calculated choices. As I gathered them into my arms, their tiny hands gripping mine as if to anchor themselves to something real, I resolved that I would fight with every ounce of strength I possessed to reclaim the future that had been stolen from us. I knew that the path ahead would be fraught with unimaginable challenges and heartache, but in that moment, with my daughters pressed against my chest, I found a glimmer of fierce determination rising from the depths of my despair. I whispered soft reassurances into their hair, promises that trembled on the edge of hope, even as the painful truth settled deep in my bones. Our family had been shattered, our lives irrevocably altered, and nothing would ever restore the innocence and security we had once known. The airport, with its indifferent bustle and ceaseless announcements, had transformed into the stage for this life-altering revelation, a moment when the illusions of control and perfection were brutally stripped away, leaving only the raw, unvarnished truth of betrayal and the desperate need for survival. I clung to my daughters as if they were the very essence of hope itself, knowing that from this shattered moment, I would have to forge a new future, a future where every step was a testament to the unyielding strength of a father's love and the promise that, despite the darkness that had descended upon us, there would always be a way forward. In the midst of the chaos, as I cradled Sophie and Claire in my arms and the echo of their soft cries still reverberated in my ears, a security officer approached with a concerned yet professional expression on his face. His voice, gentle but insistent, asked, "Sir, is everything okay?" My mind, reeling from the shock of betrayal and the desperate urgency of the moment, managed only a strained, "I need to file a report." Those words, spoken through choked breaths, carried the weight of a man whose life had been upended in a single, irreversible moment. The officer nodded, guiding me toward the security office as if leading me into a sterile world where facts and protocols might offer some semblance of clarity amidst the swirling chaos of my emotions. As I walked through the terminal, carrying my trembling daughters close, every step felt like a descent further into a nightmare I could neither escape nor fully comprehend. The hum of conversation and the indifferent shuffle of other travelers faded into a distant murmur, leaving me alone with the searing reality of Vanessa's betrayal. A betrayal that extended far beyond the cancellation of a reservation and into the very heart of our family's existence. The security office was a cramped, sterile space where fluorescent lights flickered overhead and the cold, unyielding logic of procedure offered little comfort to a man whose world had just collapsed. I recounted the events with halting words and bitter regret, trying to piece together the fragments of a narrative that no longer made sense. Every detail, the look on Vanessa's face, the tone of her text, the helpless expressions of my daughters, reverberated in my mind like a relentless drumbeat of loss and anger. In that room, as an officer meticulously recorded my statement, I was forced to confront the undeniable truth. Vanessa had abandoned not just me, but our own flesh and blood, without a shred of remorse or hesitation. It was a truth that shattered any remnants of the life we had built together, leaving me with the bitter realization that the woman I had once loved had orchestrated this betrayal with calculated precision. The sterile surroundings of the security office did nothing to soften the impact of this revelation. Instead, they served as a stark reminder that the systems I had trusted to maintain order and security were powerless against the chaos that now defined my life. As I clutched Sophie and Claire close, their small hands trembling against mine, I vowed in that moment that I would do everything in my power to ensure that they would never suffer from this abandonment. I promised myself that I would fight tooth and nail to rebuild our lives from the ruins of a betrayal so deep that it threatened to drown every hope I had ever nurtured. The pain of that day, the cold finality of Vanessa's actions, was etched into every word I spoke, every tear that fell silently as I recounted the events. It was in that confining room, surrounded by the indifferent hum of bureaucracy, that I realized our lives would never be the same again. That from this point forward, I would have to assume the mantle of both protector and provider for my shattered family. The investigation, initiated by a single act of callous abandonment, was just the beginning of a journey that would force me to confront not only the betrayal of a partner, but also the vulnerability that had allowed such deception to flourish. And as I sat there, my daughters leaning on me for comfort, I knew that the path ahead was one of painful truths and hard-fought battles, a path that I would walk with unwavering determination, no matter the cost. In the midst of the sterile efficiency of the security office, as Sergeant Dawson methodically took my statement with a clinical detachment that belied the raw, emotional turmoil coursing through me, my phone buzzed insistently, a sound that would soon shatter any lingering remnants of the life I thought I knew. I fumbled to unlock it, my fingers trembling as I saw Vanessa's name flash on the screen. With a sinking heart, I opened the message to read a single sentence that reverberated like a death knell through my soul. "The children are in your care now. The 529 plan documents are in the safe at home. This is our last chance." Each word struck me with the force of a sledgehammer, obliterating any illusion that our future had once been secure. I had built our life on promises, a carefully nurtured college savings fund meant to secure the future of Sophie and Claire, a beacon of hope for their education and well-being. And now, with a few cold, calculated sentences, Vanessa had declared that everything was mine to guard, as if it were simply a matter of legal paperwork rather than the legacy of our family. I stared at the message, my mind racing with disbelief and fury, trying desperately to process the implications of those words. They were not just instructions or a final ultimatum. They were the unmistakable declaration of a severance, a final, irrevocable break in the bond that had once tied us together. Before I could fully absorb the weight of her words, another notification arrived. A photograph, as casually callous as the text that preceded it. The image showed Vanessa, her face adorned with a smile that was as cold as it was insincere, sitting beside Marcus, her business partner, whose presence had always raised a quiet alarm in the back of my mind. They were together in a tropical paradise, surrounded by the luxuries of a life that I had never been privy to, as if our family had been nothing more than a stepping stone to their own ambitions. The photograph, taken without any apparent remorse or hesitation, was a cruel, vivid reminder of the betrayal I had already begun to comprehend. It was as if Vanessa had meticulously planned not only her escape, but also the erasure of every promise, every future dream that I had clung to with unwavering hope. In that single moment, the full scale of her treachery became brutally clear to me. Vanessa had not only left me behind at the airport, abandoning our daughters to a cold, indifferent fate, but she had also orchestrated an elaborate financial and emotional coup, one that siphoned away our future and replaced it with a stark new reality, a reality where the safety and security of my daughters rested solely on my shoulders. I felt as though the world had tilted on its axis, the very ground beneath me crumbling as the finality of her message sank in. The weight of that betrayal was almost too much to bear, a crushing force that threatened to break me entirely. Yet, amid the fury and despair, a fierce determination began to kindle in the depths of my wounded heart. I vowed then and there that I would not allow Vanessa's calculated treachery to destroy the future of Sophie and Claire. I would fight to reclaim what had been stolen from us, even if it meant waging a battle against a system that had once seemed unassailable. In that moment, as I clutched my phone and stared at the damning text and the incriminating photograph, I knew that my life was on a precipice. The safe, the 529 plan, the promise of a secure future, all of it was now tainted by Vanessa's betrayal, a betrayal that would force me to confront not only the financial ruin that lay ahead, but also the emotional scars that threatened to define me. I took a deep, shuddering breath, knowing that the path I now faced was fraught with hardship and peril, yet also realizing that it was the only path that would lead me to the truth. And so, with a heavy heart and a soul burning with resolve, I stepped out of that security office, carrying with me the damning message that had irrevocably altered the course of my life. A message that would propel me into a battle for justice, for the future of my daughters, and for the reclamation of everything that Vanessa had so coldly taken away. That night, sleep became an impossible luxury as I sat at our kitchen table, poring over bank statements and financial records by the dim light of a single lamp. The numbers that stared back at me were a cruel testament to the meticulous betrayal that Vanessa had orchestrated. Every carefully saved dollar, every ounce of financial security that I had worked so hard to accumulate, was being siphoned away through a series of extravagant transactions that defied logic and shattered every promise of a secure future for our daughters. The 529 plan, the cornerstone of our hopes for Sophie's and Claire's education, had been decimated, drained of over $500,000 in a matter of months. I could scarcely believe the extent of the devastation as I traced each wire transfer, each unauthorized purchase, and each secret transaction that pointed to a labyrinth of luxury expenses, private jet rentals, and offshore accounts. The sum, a staggering $775,000, was gone, evaporated into the dark corners of financial deceit with a cold efficiency that left me reeling. As I stared at the figures, the reality of Vanessa's treachery began to crystallize in excruciating detail. She had not merely left us behind, she had systematically robbed our family of its future. Every dollar represented a dream shattered, a promise of security and hope that had been callously violated. My hands trembled as I navigated the online records, each click a reminder of the life we had built and the future that was now being stripped away piece by piece. The numbers did not lie. They were a damning indictment of a betrayal so profound that it transcended the personal and delved into the realm of calculated criminality. I felt an overwhelming mix of grief and anger, a burning fury that surged with every fraudulent transfer and every inexplicable expense. In the silence of that long, sleepless night, I vowed that I would not allow Vanessa's financial machinations to destroy the legacy I had fought so hard to build for my daughters. Every figure on that screen became a rallying cry, a call to reclaim the future that had been so ruthlessly stolen. I made a silent promise to myself that, no matter how deep the betrayal ran, I would do everything in my power to rebuild, to recover the funds that had been so callously funneled away, and to ensure that Sophie and Claire would never have to face a future defined by financial ruin. The stark reality of that financial nightmare was a bitter pill to swallow, a betrayal measured not in tears or broken promises alone, but in cold, hard currency that had been siphoned away in a calculated display of deceit. In that moment, as the clock ticked relentlessly through the night and the numbers continued to haunt me, I knew that the battle ahead would be as much about reclaiming our financial security as it would be about healing the deep emotional wounds that had been inflicted by Vanessa's treachery. The road to recovery was going to be long and fraught with challenges, but with every ounce of determination in my being, I resolved to fight for a future where my daughter's dreams would not be compromised by the betrayal of a woman I once loved. That night, amidst the hum of the refrigerator and the cold glow of computer screens, I began to lay the groundwork for a new chapter. A chapter defined by resilience, unwavering love, and the relentless pursuit of justice for the family that I had sworn to protect. The following morning, as I still grappled with the enormity of the previous night's revelations, there was a knock on my door that signaled the arrival of a new, unsettling reality. I opened the door to find two men in dark suits standing on my doorstep, their expressions steely and unreadable, their presence foreboding. One of them introduced himself as an FBI agent, his tone measured and devoid of any pretense of sympathy, and informed me that they needed to speak with me about my wife. In that moment, a cold dread swept over me as I realized that the betrayal I had been forced to confront was not merely a domestic calamity. It was part of a larger, more insidious criminal scheme. The agents explained, in deliberate and dispassionate detail, that Vanessa and her so-called business partner, Marcus, were under investigation for serious financial crimes that went far beyond personal betrayal. They laid out the charges: money laundering, tax fraud, and a host of other financial misdeeds that painted a picture of a meticulously orchestrated criminal enterprise. As I listened to their measured explanations, each word hammered home the terrifying truth that Vanessa had been living a double life. A life where our family's future was nothing more than a pawn in a vast, calculated game of financial deceit. The shock of their words left me numb, a hollow echo of the man I once was, as I struggled to come to terms with the full extent of her betrayal. Here was the woman I had loved, the woman I had believed to be my partner in every sense, now revealed to be an active participant in a criminal enterprise that threatened not only our financial security but also the very fabric of our lives. The agents' voices, devoid of any personal empathy, recited the cold, hard facts with a clinical detachment that was both terrifying and inevitable. They informed me that Vanessa and Marcus were not only fleeing from our lives, but that they were now considered fugitives, and that any hope of reconciliation was now replaced by a legal battle that would span years. I felt as if the ground had shifted beneath me, leaving me adrift in a sea of betrayal and uncertainty. The enormity of it all was overwhelming, and as I listened, my mind raced with questions. How had I failed to see the signs? How could someone I had trusted with every fiber of my being lead such a double life? Yet even as these questions pounded in my mind, I watched the news in a daze, the television screen a window into a scene so surreal it might have been a cruel dream. Vanessa and Marcus had been apprehended in Hawaii, a paradise that had served as the backdrop for their carefully constructed escape. Images flickered across the screen. Vanessa, seated by a sparkling pool, her face caught in a fleeting expression of shock as the FBI swarmed the luxurious villa. Marcus, the once unassuming business partner, now rendered powerless by the iron grip of justice. I listened, numb and detached, as the reporter recounted the dramatic arrest. "Vanessa Reed, you're under arrest," the voice had declared, a phrase that echoed in my mind like a final verdict on our shattered past. In that moment, the woman who had once been the anchor of my existence, the one who had dictated every nuance of our lives, was reduced to a figure. It signified the beginning of a new chapter, one defined by the necessity to rebuild not just our financial stability but the very essence of our family. I realized then that while Vanessa and Marcus were now in the hands of the law, The true challenge lay ahead. The arduous task of mending a broken legacy, of piecing together the remnants of a life that had been shattered by calculated betrayal. In the cold light of that day, as I grappled with the weight of her arrest, I felt the first stirrings of a resolve that would carry me through the coming battles, a determination to protect my daughters, to reclaim our future, and to ensure that no matter how deep the wounds, the strength of a father's love could forge a path toward healing and redemption. The day of the trial arrived with an oppressive silence that seemed to settle over the courtroom like a heavy shroud. I sat in the gallery, my heart a tumult of emotions as I watched the proceedings unfold, a somber pageant of guilt and retribution that laid bare every damning detail of Vanessa's betrayal. The evidence was laid out in excruciating clarity. Video footage showing Vanessa and Marcus nonchalantly walking away from the terminal with our daughters, their faces devoid of the slightest hint of remorse. Testimonies that recounted the cold indifference with which our children had been abandoned, and mountains of financial records that documented the systematic siphoning of our hard-earned savings into a labyrinth of illicit transactions. Every piece of evidence was a blow, each revelation a reminder of the life I had once believed to be unassailable. As the trial progressed, the courtroom's atmosphere grew increasingly solemn, the faces of the jurors hardening with the weight of the truth. When the moment of verdict finally arrived, the tension in the room was palpable, as if the very air held its breath in anticipation. The judge's voice rang out with an unyielding finality. "Vanessa Reed, you are hereby sentenced to 20 years in federal prison." The words hung in the air, heavy and irreversible, as Vanessa turned to face me. For a brief, agonizing moment, our eyes met, hers filled with genuine, unfeigned tears that spoke of regret and sorrow, mine steeled with a cold resolve that had grown out of betrayal and heartache. She reached out, her voice trembling as she pleaded, "Jonathan, please." But I rose slowly, each step deliberate as I adjusted my tie with an air of finality that left no room for the past. Without a word, I walked away from that courtroom, leaving behind a life that had been defined by promises and shared dreams, now reduced to a series of irrevocable decisions and shattered illusions. In that solemn, silent moment, I felt a surge of liberation, a painful but necessary shedding of the weight of a love that had betrayed me. The trial, with its harsh revelations and unyielding verdict, marked not just the punishment of a woman who had stolen our future, but also the beginning of a new chapter in my life, one where I would reclaim the pieces of a broken legacy and forge a path defined not by betrayal, but by unwavering determination and the fierce love of a father for his daughters. In the wake of the trial, as the echoes of Vanessa's sentencing still reverberated in my mind, I turned my focus to the one constant that remained unbroken: my daughters, Sophie and Claire. The pain of betrayal and the devastating financial losses had cast a long shadow over our lives, but amidst the ruins, I found a resolute spark of hope. I knew that for Sophie and Claire, stability and security were not mere luxuries, but essential foundations for their future. Determined to rebuild the life that had been so ruthlessly shattered, I set to work transforming our home into a sanctuary of love, warmth, and unwavering support. I repainted their rooms with bright, hopeful colors that spoke of new beginnings and the promise of a future untainted by the past. I replaced old, worn teddy bears with new ones and filled each corner of our home with bedtime stories, gentle laughter, and the simple comforts that only a loving parent can provide. Every evening, as I tucked them into bed and listened to their soft whispers of reassurance, I made a promise that resonated with every beat of my heart. I would protect them from the pain of abandonment, from the uncertainties of a world that had turned so dark. I recalled the trembling voice of little Claire when she whispered, "Daddy, we don't have to leave, right?" And with a tender certainty that belied the turmoil of my soul, I replied, "Never." In that moment, I understood that rebuilding was not merely about restoring the physical spaces we once called home, but about mending the very fabric of our family, a fabric that had been torn by betrayal but could be rewoven with threads of resilience, trust, and unconditional love. I devoted every ounce of energy to ensuring that our lives would slowly, painstakingly, return to a semblance of normalcy. I immersed myself in the small rituals that defined our family, cooking together, sharing stories at the dinner table, and finding solace in the quiet moments that bridged the gap between past pain and future hope. Each act of care, every loving gesture, was a rebellion against the cruelty of the past and a declaration that our future would be shaped by our own hands, not by the betrayal of those who had wronged us. As the days turned into months, the wounds of the past began to heal, albeit slowly and with lingering scars that served as reminders of the cost of trust. I watched as Sophie and Claire, once fragile and uncertain, blossomed into vibrant little souls who laughed freely and embraced each new day with a resilience that filled me with both pride and a bittersweet ache. In the quiet moments of the night, as I sat alone in the dim glow of our living room, I allowed myself to feel the deep, abiding love that had always been the foundation of our family, a love that no amount of betrayal could ever extinguish. I knew that the road ahead would be long and fraught with challenges, that the scars of Vanessa's betrayal might never fully fade. But I also understood that in every challenge lay an opportunity for renewal, for a future built on the unbreakable bond between a father and his daughters. In the gentle, reassuring voices of Sophie and Claire, in the soft warmth of their embraces, I found the strength to move forward, to rebuild not just a home but a legacy of love, security, and unyielding hope for the future. Years passed and time, in its relentless, indifferent manner, began to dull the raw edges of betrayal and loss. I had rebuilt a life defined by strength, resilience, and the unwavering love I held for my daughters, Sophie and Claire, who now flourished in the safety and security of the home I had so painstakingly recreated. Yet even as I nurtured their bright futures, a final chapter in this painful saga loomed on the horizon. A chapter that would test every ounce of resolve I had gathered through the long years of hardship. After serving only 5 years of her sentence, Vanessa was granted parole, a development that sent a fresh wave of turmoil crashing over the carefully rebuilt world I had created. One quiet afternoon, as I was tending to the comforting routines of our suburban life, a gentle murmur of laughter in the kitchen, the soft rustling of pages as we read bedtime stories, I heard a knock at the door that echoed like a ghost from a past I had tried so desperately to leave behind. I opened the door, and there she stood, Vanessa, the woman who had once controlled every aspect of my existence, now looking weathered and diminished by the ravages of prison life. Her eyes, once filled with the confident sparkle of a woman who dictated my every move, now brimmed with a desperate plea as she whispered, "Jonathan, please, let me see them." In that moment, the years of betrayal, the pain of abandonment, and the bitter taste of shattered promises all converged into a single, heart-wrenching instant. I stood there, the weight of every lost dream and every broken promise pressing down upon me, and lowered my voice to a whisper that was both resolute and filled with sorrow. "They were your daughters. You lost that right the day you walked away." For a long, agonizing moment, we simply stood there in silence, the air thick with the finality of our severed ties. Her lips trembled as if searching for words that could somehow mend what had been irrevocably broken, but I could see the futility in her eyes, the desperate hope that clung to her like a fading echo of a love that once was. Then, with a hesitation that seemed to last an eternity, she turned and walked away, leaving me standing in the doorway with nothing but the quiet acceptance of a final goodbye. In that moment, as the door closed softly behind her, I felt an unexpected peace settle over me, a peace that was not born of triumph or revenge, but of a deep, soul-worn understanding that some chapters must end so that new ones can begin. The anger, the sorrow, and the bitter memories slowly receded into the background, replaced by a steady, enduring resolve to move forward and to cherish the future that lay ahead for my daughters and for myself. That final farewell was not a victory for either of us, but rather a necessary, painful parting that freed me from the shackles of a past defined by betrayal. It was the moment I realized that the love I held for my children, the strength I had forged through years of hardship, and the promise of a new beginning were more powerful than any lingering regrets. And so, as I closed the door on that final chapter, I stepped forward into the future with a heart unburdened by the weight of anger or regret, ready to embrace the quiet, enduring strength that comes from knowing that I had done everything in my power to protect the ones I loved and to reclaim the life that was rightfully ours.